She entered the military hospital with shadows clinging to her skin, a quiet figure nobody seemed to notice. The bandage on her temple told only part of her story, but her eyes, distant and focused on something beyond the chaos of the emergency ward, revealed depths no medical chart could capture. Nobody knew she'd once flown through storms that shattered lesser pilots, or that her name was etched on aircraft that had changed aviation history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The waiting room at Westfield Air Force Base Medical Center hummed with the usual sounds, charts being flipped, monitors beeping, medics rushing between beds. It was a symphony of ordered urgency that Captain Sarah Reeves barely registered as she waited, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her discharge papers. The mission had gone sideways 3 days ago, leaving her with a concussion, 12 stitches, and temporary flight restriction. But physical wounds weren't what weighed on her mind. Captain Reeves? A young medic appeared, clipboard in hand. His uniform was crisp, his posture perfect. Fresh from training, she guessed. "We're ready for your final evaluation." Sarah nodded, rising slowly. Her balance was still off, making the room tilt slightly when she stood. The medic steadied her with a practiced hand, though something in his touch betrayed hesitation. "I've got it," she said quietly, straightening her shoulders. He led her down the corridor, past rooms filled with injured service members. Some faces she recognized from different squadrons, others were strangers. A few nodded in recognition as she passed. Most didn't look up. Sarah preferred it that way. Anonymity had become her refuge since the incident. "In here, please," the medic said, gesturing to an examination room. The space was standard issue. Beige walls, examination table with crisp paper, medical diagrams that nobody ever really looked at. Sarah sat on the edge of the table, hands folded in her lap, waiting. "Colonel Matthews will be with you shortly for the evaluation. He's reviewing your file." The medic shifted his weight, a nervous habit that betrayed his inexperience. "Actually, ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, are you the same Reeves from the Kandahar extraction?" Sarah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. "That was a long time ago. It's just, we studied that mission in tactical response. They said the pilot flew through conditions that should have downed the aircraft." His voice had taken on an edge of excitement. 3 engine failures, visibility near zero, and still managed to extract a 12-person team under heavy fire. "Military reports tend to exaggerate," she replied, her voice flat. "Is Colonel Matthews running late?" The medic checked his watch. "No, ma'am. He should be here any minute." He hesitated, then added, "They also said the pilot refused commendation, never understood why someone would do that." Sarah's gaze fixed on the wall ahead. Sometimes recognition isn't what matters. The door opened before the medic could respond. Colonel Matthews entered, a thick file tucked under his arm. He was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many years in desert deployments. "Captain Reeves," he said with a nod. "Let's get this over with. Technical Sergeant Harris, that will be all." The young medic, Harris, gave a sharp salute and left, but not before casting one last curious glance at Sarah. Matthews set the file on the counter and leaned against it, studying her. "How's the head?" "Fine, sir." "That's not what your scans say." He flipped open the file. "Moderate concussion, possible minor swelling. Not to mention the laceration that required 12 stitches. I've had worse." "Yes, you have." His tone shifted slightly. "I've been reviewing your service record. It's unusual." Sarah said nothing. "Most pilots with your flight hours would be wearing Silver Eagles by now, not captain's bars. You've been passed over for promotion 3 times." "Personal choice, sir." Matthews raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" "Because your combat record is exemplary. Your technical skills are off the charts. Your subordinates respect you, even if they find you reserved." "Is this relevant to my..." A series of tests, following his finger with her eyes, touching her nose, walking a straight line. Sarah completed each one with mechanical precision. "Your balance is still off," he noted. "Not enough to impact duty." "That's not for you to decide." Matthews made a note in her file. 2 more weeks of restricted duty. No flight clearance until the follow-up MRI shows improvement. Sarah didn't argue, but her shoulders tensed. 2 more weeks grounded. 2 more weeks trapped in administrative purgatory. "You don't like being earthbound, do you, Captain?" Matthews asked, watching her reaction. "Few pilots do." "True, but most haven't logged as many hours in experimental aircraft as you have." He studied her with renewed interest. "Your file mentions you were part of the Aurora project before it officially existed." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her pulse quickened slightly. The Aurora project wasn't classified anymore, but it wasn't widely discussed either. The development of hypersonic aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. "That was a different life," she said quietly. "Was it?" Matthews leaned forward. "Because according to this, you helped design the thrust vectoring system they're still using in the newest prototypes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Technical contributions from a junior officer. Sarah deflected. Nothing significant. Matthews didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the small window overlooking the airfield. In the distance, F-35s Saturday on the tarmac like predators at rest. "You know, when they assigned me to this base last year, I toured the engineering lab," he said. "There's a plaque on the wall listing breakthrough innovations. Your name is there, though most people wouldn't know it. Just S. Reeves, among 24 others." Sarah remained silent. "What I can't figure out," Matthews continued, "is why someone who revolutionized thrust vectoring systems is now flying standard search and rescue missions. I go where I'm needed. That's the official answer. What's the real one?" Sarah stood, steadier now. "Are we finished, Colonel? I have paperwork waiting." Matthews sighed, recognizing the wall she'd constructed. "Medically, we're done for today, but I'm scheduling you for twice-weekly check-ins instead of the standard protocol." "That's excessive for a concussion. Not when the concussion belongs to someone with your particular history." He handed her a form. "Sign here. Report to Medical Bay 3 on Mondays and Thursdays at 0800. Sarah signed without reading, her handwriting precise despite her injury. "One more thing, Captain," Matthews said as she turned to leave. "The young medic who brought you in, Technical Sergeant Harris. He's been researching the Kandahar extraction for his advanced tactical training. He doesn't know it was you. Good. He wants to understand how that pilot made calculations that should have been impossible under those conditions, the kind of split-second mathematics that no standard training covers." Sarah paused at the door. "Tell him it wasn't calculation. It was instinct." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Matthews asked quietly. She left without answering, her footsteps fading down the corridor. The base cafeteria was half empty at 1,400 hours. Sarah selected a corner table with her back to the wall, a habit formed during years of deployment. Her lunch, a bland turkey sandwich and apple, sat mostly untouched as she reviewed reports on her tablet. 2 weeks of grounded duty meant catching up on the administrative tasks she usually avoided. "Captain Reeves?" Sarah looked up to find Technical Sergeant Harris standing at attention beside her table, a tray in his hands. "At ease, Sergeant," she said, returning her attention to the tablet. "What do you need?" "Permission to join you, ma'am." She glanced around at the dozen empty tables. "There's plenty of seating available." "Yes, ma'am, but I have questions about the medical follow-up protocol Colonel Matthews assigned you." Sarah knew it was an excuse, but she nodded toward the chair across from her. Harris sat, arranging his tray with methodical precision. Utensils aligned, drink exactly 2 inches from the plate. The movements of some interrupted, then quickly added, "Ma'am." They referred me to flight operations technical manuals that don't address the human element. The human element is unpredictable and therefore not scientifically valuable, Sarah said, repeating words she'd heard countless times during her early career. With respect, Captain, that contradicts empirical evidence. Harris's voice grew more confident. The Kandahar extraction proved that human intuition can supersede computational limitations under certain conditions. Sarah set down her tablet, studying the young medic. Despite his rigid posture, there was an intensity in his eyes that reminded her of herself 20 years ago, before experience had taught her the cost of standing out. "Why are you really here, Sergeant?" Harris hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it on the table between them. It was a printout of an old mission report, portions redacted. But the date was clear. June 17, 2005. The Kandahar extraction. "I've studied every available document about this mission," he said quietly. "Atmospheric conditions, aircraft specifications, geographical challenges. By every calculation, that extraction should have failed." "Sometimes we get lucky," Sarah replied, pushing the paper back toward him without looking at it. "It wasn't luck." Harris leaned forward. "The pilot made a series of decisions that defied standard operating procedure. They flew below minimum altitude requirements through a sandstorm with near-zero visibility. They calculated fuel consumption rates that our best computers still can't model accurately. And when the primary extraction zone was compromised, they landed on a ridgeline that technical specifications listed as incapable of supporting aircraft weight." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tapped a subtle rhythm on the table, a tell she'd never fully eliminated. "Your point, Sergeant?" "My point is that either the official report is wrong, or someone did something impossible." Harris met her gaze directly. "And after reviewing your flight records for the past 20 years, I believe you were that pilot." The cafeteria seemed to fade around them as Sarah held his gaze. She'd spent years building walls around that mission, around all her missions. Walls that kept the questions at bay, that preserved the quiet life she'd carefully constructed for herself after everything that happened. "Speculation won't help your research paper, Sergeant," she finally said. "It's not speculation. I cross-referenced the mission timestamp with your service record. You were there." Harris pushed the paper toward her again. "What I can't figure out is why the Air Force's most innovative pilot is deliberately flying under the radar. Why someone who could be leading the entire flight program is taking routine missions and declining promotions." Sarah stood abruptly, gathering her tablet. "This conversation is over, Sergeant." "Captain, please." "That's an order, not a request." Her voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable weight of command. "Focus on your medical duties, not on dissecting old mission reports." She left him sitting there, her half-eaten lunch abandoned on the table. As she pushed through the cafeteria doors, Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same constriction that came every time someone got too close to the truth, a truth that had cost her everything once before. The afternoon sun beat down on the tarmac as Sarah made her way to the administrative building. Heat waves shimmered above the concrete, distorting the silhouettes of aircraft in the distance. She paused, watching as maintenance crews swarmed around an F-35, preparing it for an afternoon sortie. The sight of it, sleek, powerful, waiting, made her fingers itch with muscle memory. "Grounded and going stir-crazy already, Reeves?" A voice called from behind her. Major Elena Cortez approached, flight helmet tucked under her arm. They'd trained together years ago, though Cortez had taken the traditional career path. Steady promotions, command positions. The trajectory everyone expected. "Just enjoying the view," Sarah replied. Cortez snorted. "Right, because watching other people fly is every pilot's idea of a good time." She gestured to the bandage on Sarah's temple. "Heard you caught some debris during the evacuation. Bad luck." "Could have been worse. Always can be." Cortez studied her for a moment. "You know, rumor has it you're being considered for the new hypersonic test program. Your name came up in the selection committee meeting yesterday." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her pulse quickened. "I haven't applied for any test programs." "You didn't have to. Apparently someone high up requested you specifically." Cortez leaned closer. "Word is, They found your original design notes for the Aurora project, the ones that supposedly disappeared 20 years ago. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she maintained an impassive expression. The Aurora project. 20 years of carefully constructed obscurity threatened to unravel in an instant. "That's impossible," she said, keeping her voice level. "Those designs were theoretical, never implemented." Cortez raised an eyebrow. "Then why is General Harrington flying in tomorrow specifically to meet with you?" "I don't know any General Harrington." "Four-star, head of Aerospace Development Command. Not someone you say no to." Cortez checked her watch. "Listen, I've got to prep for flight. But whatever this is about, it's big. Thought you should know." As Cortez walked away, Sarah remained motionless, her mind racing through implications. General Harrington. The name triggered fractured memories of closed-door meetings and classified briefings from another lifetime. If he was coming here, if he'd found her designs, then everything she'd sacrificed to disappear might have been for nothing. She made her way to her quarters, a Spartan efficiency unit on the east side of the base. Once inside, she locked the door and pulled a worn leather journal from beneath her mattress. The binding was cracked with age, the pages yellowed. She hadn't opened it in years, but had never been able to destroy it either. Inside were calculations and sketches, the original thrust vectoring formulas she'd developed as a young lieutenant. Innovations that had seemed intuitive to her but had revolutionized hypersonic flight. Innovations that had later been weaponized against her will. Sarah traced her finger over equations that once flowed from her mind as naturally as breathing. The military had officially credited a team of senior engineers for these breakthroughs, allowing her to fade into the background. It had been her choice, her requirement after what happened in Kyrgyzstan. A sharp knock on her door jolted her from her thoughts. She quickly slid the journal back into its hiding place and composed herself before opening the door. Colonel Matthews stood in the hallway, his expression grave. "Captain Reeves." "May I come in?" Sarah stepped aside, noting the formal file tucked under his arm, different from her medical records. This one had red security stripes across its cover. "I'll be direct," Matthews said, remaining standing even after she offered him the room's only chair. "General Harrington will be arriving tomorrow at 0900. He specifically requested your presence at a classified briefing." "So I've heard," Sarah replied, her voice carefully neutral. "May I ask why?" Matthews hesitated. "The details are above my clearance level. But I've been asked to ensure you're medically cleared to participate, despite your recent injury." "And am I?" "That depends." Matthews set the file on her small desk. "Your neurological tests show no permanent damage, but you're still exhibiting minor balance issues and potential stress reactions. Nothing that would impair my judgment. Physically, perhaps not." Matthews studied her. "But there are other concerns. Your psychological profile indicates significant trauma associated with your early career projects that, I believe, General Harrington intends to discuss." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind was calculating escape routes, contingency plans, habits never fully abandoned from her past. "I appreciate your concern, Colonel, but I'm fully capable of attending a briefing." Matthews sighed. "This isn't just about attending a briefing, Captain. Technical Sergeant Harris brought some concerns to my attention this afternoon. About your history with experimental aircraft. Harris should focus on his medical duties." "He is. That's why he flagged this." Matthews opened the file and extracted a brain scan image. "This is from your initial assessment after the injury. Standard procedure. What's not standard is this area here." He pointed to a small section near the temporal lobe. "Enhanced neural activity consistent with individuals who process complex mathematical calculations at accelerated rates." Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "I'm not following, sir." "I think you are." Matthews closed the file. "I've authorized your participation in tomorrow's briefing, but as your physician, I want to be clear. You have the right to decline any requests that might trigger past trauma. Whatever happened 20 years ago, whatever you're running from, your well-being matters." After Matthews left, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, mind racing. They'd found her. After all this time, all the careful steps she'd taken to become unremarkable, to blend into the machinery of military bureaucracy, someone had connected the dots. Sleep. eluded her that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, memories surfacing that she'd spent years suppressing. The exhilaration of those early test flights. The pride of seeing her calculations translate into reality as experimental aircraft broke barriers once thought impossible. Then the horror of discovering how her innovations were being applied. The confrontation. The ultimatum. The agreement that had buried her career in exchange for her silence. At 0845 the next morning, Sarah stood outside Conference Room B in her dress uniform, the creases sharp, her appearance impeccable despite her sleepless night. 2 security officers flanked the door, checking identification against their tablets. "Captain Reeves," one acknowledged, scanning her ID badge. "You're expected. Please surrender all electronic devices before entering." Sarah handed over her phone and smartwatch. The security officer then passed a detection wand over her uniform, nodding when it remained silent. "You're clear. General Harrington is waiting." The conference room had been transformed into a secure briefing area. Blackout screens covered the windows, and signal jammers hummed discreetly in each corner. At the head of the table sat a man in his 60s, silver-haired and ramrod straight, despite his age. His uniform bore the 4 stars of a full general, along with rows of decorations that told the story of a lifetime of service. Beside him sat 2 civilians in dark suits, the unmistakable appearance of intelligence personnel. "Captain Reeves," General Harrington said, his voice carrying the natural authority of decades in command. "Thank you for joining us." Sarah saluted crisply. "Sir." "At ease." He gestured to an empty chair across from him. "Please, sit." As she took her seat, Sarah noted the materials spread across the table: satellite imagery, technical schematics, and a familiar leather-bound journal that made her blood run cold. Her journal. The one she'd checked this morning before leaving her quarters. The one that should have been safely hidden beneath her mattress. "I believe this belongs to you," Harrington said, pushing the journal toward her. "Remarkable work. Even more remarkable that you've kept it hidden all these years." Sarah's mind calculated the possibilities. Denial. Deflection. Instead, she chose directness. "How did you get this, sir?" "That's not important," one of the civilians interjected. His ID badge read Keller, DoD Advanced Research. "I disagree," Sarah replied, her voice hardening. "That journal was in my private quarters this morning. Unauthorized access to an officer's personal property is a violation of military code." Quote, Harrington held up a hand, silencing Keller before he could respond. "You're right, Captain, and for that invasion of privacy I apologize, but the circumstances are extraordinary." He nodded to the second civilian, who activated a holographic display in the center of the table. A 3-dimensional image appeared, a sleek aircraft unlike any currently in service. Its lines were almost organic, its propulsion system unlike conventional jets. "Do you recognize this design, Captain?" Harrington asked quietly. Sarah stared at the rotating image, her expression carefully blank despite the shock coursing through her. It was her design, the one she'd conceptualized but never fully developed, the one she'd abandoned when she discovered how her work was being weaponized. "It appears to be a hypersonic reconnaissance platform," she said neutrally. "Theoretical design, not theoretical anymore." Harrington manipulated the display, zooming in on specific components. "This is Aurora 7, the 7th iteration of a project you helped pioneer 2 decades ago. And it's in trouble." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that's killing pilots." Keller's voice was clipped. 3 test flights, 3 crashes, 6 dead pilots." The room fell silent as Sarah processed this information. 6 dead. Using her designs. "I left that program 20 years ago," she finally said. "Whatever problems you're having now aren't my responsibility." "Perhaps not legally," Harrington conceded, "but ethically? These aircraft are flying with thrust vectoring systems based on your original calculations. Systems that worked perfectly in the first 3 generations of Aurora," her mid-rise. "Captain Reeves, Sarah, I understand why you left the program. I know what happened in Kyrgyzstan. I know the choice you were forced to make. Sarah slowly sank back into her chair, her expression turning to stone. That incident is classified beyond this room's clearance level. Not beyond mine. Harrington's eyes held hers. I've reviewed the complete file. I know they used your technology for a targeted strike you never authorized. I know you threatened to go public unless they buried your involvement and allowed you to serve in relative anonymity. Then you know I have nothing more to contribute to this project. Harrington leaned forward. What if I told you Aurora isn't a weapons platform anymore? What if I told you it's being developed for high-speed medical evacuation from conflict zones? That it could reduce casualty transport times by 70%? Sarah's skepticism must have shown on her face, because Harrington continued without waiting for her response. After Kyrgyzstan, the program was temporarily shut down. When it restarted 5 years later, it had a new mission profile. Humanitarian. Search and rescue. The capabilities you designed to break speed barriers are now being developed to save lives, but we can't deploy aircraft that crash. Why come to me now? You have entire teams of engineers. Because they've hit a wall. Harrington nodded to Keller, who pulled up technical data on the display. The system failures occur only under specific atmospheric conditions, conditions that match those you encountered during the Kandahar extraction. Sarah stared at the data, her mind automatically processing the patterns. The sandstorm, the impossible landing, the calculations she'd made instinctively that had saved 12 lives. You want me to solve your engineering problem. I want you to finish what you started. Harrington corrected. 20 years ago, you saw possibilities no one else could see. You made intuitive leaps that our best computers still can't replicate. We need that insight again. And if I refuse, then we'll continue trying without you. And more pilots will likely die. Harrington's expression was solemn. But I don't think you'll refuse, Captain. Not when lives are at stake. Not when you have the chance to ensure your work saves people instead of harming them. Sarah sat in silence, her mind working through calculations and consequences. 20 years of hiding. 20 years of deliberate mediocrity. All to distance herself from innovations that had been weaponized against her will. I need to see everything, she finally said. All test flight data. All modifications to my original designs. All atmospheric conditions during the failures. Absolutely, Harrington agreed. We've prepared a secure facility. Not a facility, a hangar. With one of the aircraft. Sarah's decision was made, her tone shifting to the quiet authority she'd suppressed for decades. I don't work from simulations. I need to see it, touch it, understand how it moves. Keller started to object, but Harrington silenced him with a glance. Done. Hangar 7 has been cleared for your use. When can you start? I'm still on medical restriction, Sarah noted, touching the healing wound on her temple. Not anymore, Harrington replied, sliding a document across the table. Colonel Matthews has cleared you for special assignment, effective immediately. Unless you feel physically unable. I'll start today, Sarah interrupted, already mentally cataloging the variables she would need to examine. But I have conditions. Name them. I work alone, no engineers looking over my shoulder. No committee reviews of my methods. Harrington nodded. Acceptable. I want Technical Sergeant Harris assigned as my medical monitor. This request raised eyebrows around the table. The medic? Keller asked incredulously. What possible need? He asks the right questions. Sarah stated simply. And he's already familiar with my medical baselines. Done, Harrington agreed. Anything else? Sarah met his gaze directly, years of carefully maintained deference falling away. When this is over, if I solve your problem, my involvement remains classified. I go back to my regular duties. No recognition, no promotion, no special treatment. Harrington studied her for a long moment. You could have any position in the program. You could lead the entire aerospace division with your capabilities. That's not what I want. May I ask why? After all this time, why continue to hide your abilities? Sarah thought of all the answers she could give. the political complications, the unwanted attention, the pressure. Instead, she offered the simplest truth. Because in the sky, it's just me and the aircraft. No expectations except the ones I set for myself. That's freedom. That's all I've ever wanted. Harrington nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Your terms are accepted, Captain. The full resources of Aerospace Development Command are at your disposal. 3 hours later, Sarah stood alone in the cavernous space of Hangar 7, face to face with Aurora 7. The aircraft before her was both familiar and strange. The physical manifestation of concepts she'd sketched decades ago evolved through generations of engineering. Its skin was a matte black composite material that seemed to absorb light. Its lines were fluid, almost organic, defying traditional aircraft design. She circled it slowly, noting modifications, analyzing angles, her mind already calculating thrust vectors and airflow patterns. This was a machine built for the edge of space, a boundary walker between atmospheric flight and orbital mechanics. The hangar door opened behind her, and Technical Sergeant Harris entered, carrying a medical kit and tablet. Captain Reeves, he said, his expression a mixture of confusion and excitement. I've been temporarily reassigned as your medical monitor. They didn't explain why. Because you noticed something no one else did, Sarah replied without looking away from the aircraft. You saw patterns others missed. Harris approached cautiously, his gaze drawn to the Aurora. Is that classified? Sarah cut him off. Everything you see in this hangar is classified beyond your current clearance level. You're here for one reason only, to monitor my neurological responses while I work. Yes, ma'am. Harris set up his equipment on a nearby workbench. What exactly am I monitoring for? Sarah turned to him, her expression softening slightly. When I solve complex aerodynamic problems, my brain activity changes. Colonel Matthews noticed it in my scans. I need you to track those patterns. They might be relevant to understanding what's happening with this aircraft. Harris nodded, professional curiosity overriding his questions about security clearances. I'll need baseline readings first. Standard neurological mapping. Do it. Sarah sat on a stool, allowing him to attach sensors to her temples. And while you work, tell me more about your research on the Kandahar extraction. Harris's hands paused momentarily. You want to hear about that now? Consider it part of my baseline. Talk about the problem that interests you most. My brain will respond naturally. As Harris continued attaching monitoring equipment, he described his fascination with the impossible calculations made during that mission. The fuel consumption rates that defied conventional mathematics, the landing approach that contradicted known physics. Sarah listened, eyes closed, allowing her mind to return to that day. The sandstorm. The radio chatter. The wounded team on the ground with hostiles closing in. The moment when conventional flight paths became death sentences, and something deeper than training had taken over. There, Harris said suddenly, staring at his tablet. That's it. Your neural patterns just shifted dramatically, increased activity in regions associated with mathematical processing and spatial reasoning. Sarah opened her eyes. Show me. The tablet displayed a real-time scan of her brain activity, areas lighting up in patterns that resembled complex constellation maps. As she studied the image, understanding dawned. It's not calculation, she whispered. It's intuition. For the next 12 days, Sarah worked with single-minded focus. She slept on a cot in the hangar, ate meals at her workstation, and filled notebook after notebook with calculations and diagrams. Harris monitored her brain activity daily, collecting data that increasingly confirmed her theory. The failures in Aurora 7 weren't engineering flaws. They were human interface problems. On the morning of the 13th day, General Harrington arrived for a progress report. He found Sarah standing before a holographic display filled with neural mapping patterns, superimposed over flight control systems. Captain, he acknowledged. I understand you've reached some conclusions. I have. Sarah manipulated the display, highlighting specific interface points between pilot and aircraft. Your engineers designed Aurora 7 to be flown like conventional aircraft, just faster. That's the fundamental mistake. Explain. Hypersonic flight requires a different kind of thinking, dawned in Harrington's eyes. A neural interface. Not mind control, Sarah clarified. More like anticipatory response. The system I've designed measures premotor neural activity and executes commands nanoseconds before the pilot physically activates controls. That's revolutionary. It's necessary, Sarah corrected. At hypersonic speeds, that fraction of a second is the difference between life and death. Harrington studied the designs, his expression growing serious. How confident are you in this solution? Sarah met his gaze. Confident enough to test it myself. Absolutely not, Harrington replied immediately. You're not current on hypersonic aircraft. The risk is unacceptable. With respect, General, I'm the only one who fully understands how this system works. Sarah's voice was quiet, but firm. The neural mapping is based on my brain patterns. The interface is calibrated to my responses. There is no safer test pilot for this prototype. The argument lasted 3 days. Review boards were convened. Medical evaluations were conducted. Safety protocols were established, modified, and established again. Throughout it all, Sarah remained resolute. If Aurora 7 was to fly with her neural interface system, she would be the one to test it. On the 4th morning, standing on the tarmac in a flight suit she hadn't worn in years, Sarah felt a peculiar sense of homecoming. Technical Sergeant Harris, supervised as engineers, attached additional monitoring equipment to her flight helmet, sensors that would track her neural responses throughout the test flight. Your readings are steady, Harris noted, checking his tablet. No elevated stress markers despite the circumstances. I'm where I'm supposed to be, Sarah replied simply. General Harrington approached as the final preparations were completed. The test parameters are fixed, Captain. 30 minutes maximum flight time. No atmospheric anomalies to navigate. This is strictly a systems verification flight. Sarah nodded. Understood, sir. As she turned toward the aircraft, Harrington added, When you return, we need to discuss your future role in this program. Your capabilities are too valuable to waste on standard search and rescue missions. Sarah paused. Let's see if I survive first, shall we? The cockpit of Aurora 7 felt like a second skin, as if she'd been flying it for years instead of studying it for days. The neural interface sensors activated as she settled into the seat, the heads-up display immediately responding to her baseline thought patterns. Neural calibration complete, the system announced. Interface active and responsive. Aurora 7, this is Control. Harrington's voice came through the comm system. Pre-flight checks complete. You are cleared for vertical takeoff. Maintain subsonic velocity until reaching 40,000 feet. Understood, Control. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, but she could feel the difference immediately, the aircraft responding to her intentions microseconds before her physical commands. The vertical takeoff was smooth, almost effortless. As Aurora 7 climbed through the cloud layer, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of freedom that came only in the sky. Here, 20 miles above the Earth, the complications of rank and recognition fell away. Here, it was just her and the aircraft and the endless blue. At 40,000 feet, she received clearance for supersonic flight. The transition was seamless. No buffeting, no resistance, just pure acceleration as Aurora 7 responded to her mental commands before her hands could complete the inputs. Control, Aurora 7 passing Mach 3, she reported. Neural interface functioning nominally. Response time improved by approximately 300 milliseconds over standard controls. Confirmed, AURORA 7. You are cleared to proceed to hypersonic test parameters. Sarah took a deep breath, then thought rather than said, Let's see what you can really do. The aircraft accelerated as if reading her mind, which, in a way, it was. Mach 4, Mach 5. the sky darkening around her as Aurora 7 climbed to the edge of space. The neural interface eliminated the tiny delay predicted. Aurora 7. This is control. We're tracking a microburst developing directly in your flight path. Recommend diversion to alternate landing site. Sarah studied the weather data. The storm had formed with unusual speed. Exactly the kind of atmospheric anomaly that had caused previous Aurora crashes. The kind of conditions she'd faced during the Kandahar extraction. Negative. Control. Maintaining primary approach. Her voice was calm. This is what the system was designed to handle. Captain Reeves. This is General Harrington. Divert to alternate landing site. That's an order. Sarah's hands remained steady on the controls as she replied, "Respectfully, sir, this is the test we need. The neural interface is functioning perfectly. I can navigate this storm." She could sense Harrington's hesitation before he responded, "Proceed at your discretion, Captain. But at the first sign of system instability, you abort." Understood. As Aurora 7 descended into the storm front, turbulence seized the aircraft. Warning indicators flashed across the display. Conventional systems struggling to calculate optimal flight paths through chaotic air currents. But the neural interface remained stable, translating Sarah's intuitive adjustments into precise control inputs faster than the turbulence could develop. This was flying as she'd always understood it, not as a mechanical process of calculations and corrections, but as a conversation between pilot and aircraft and atmosphere. The neural interface simply removed the delay in that conversation. She brought Aurora 7 through the heart of the microburst, riding air currents that would have overwhelmed conventional control systems, executing maneuvers that defied traditional flight dynamics. Not by calculating them, but by feeling them. When she finally set the aircraft down on the runway with perfect precision, silence filled the radio channel for several seconds before erupting into controlled chaos. Aurora 7 control. Confirm status. Aurora 7 confirming successful landing, Sarah replied, the calmness in her voice belying the exhilaration she felt. Neural interface functioning within optimal parameters throughout descent. Airframe integrity at 100%. As ground crews surrounded the aircraft, Sarah remained in the cockpit for a moment longer, hands resting lightly on controls that had responded to her thoughts as much as her touch. For the first time in 20 years, she had flown without hiding her capabilities, without diminishing herself to fit expectations. The freedom of it was intoxicating. When she finally descended from the aircraft, General Harrington was waiting on the tarmac, his expression a mixture of awe and respect. "Captain Reeves," he said formally. "That was the most extraordinary display of piloting I've ever witnessed." Behind him stood Technical Sergeant Harris, tablet in hand, his eyes wide with understanding as he reviewed the neural data from her flight. He no longer needed to ask if she was the pilot from the Kandahar mission. He had his answer. "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. The neural interface performed exactly as designed. As did its designer. Harrington gestured toward the base. "There's a room full of engineers waiting to hear your analysis. And after that, we need to discuss your future." Sarah removed her helmet, feeling the cool air against her skin. "My conditions haven't changed, General. When this project is complete, I return to my regular duties. No recognition. No special treatment." Harrington studied her for a long moment. "May I ask you something, Captain? Not as your commanding officer, but as someone who spent 40 years in service?" Sarah nodded. "Why hide your light? Why choose obscurity when you could inspire countless others with your abilities?" She considered the question, looking back at Aurora 7 gleaming in the sunlight, the aircraft that had just made history, that would save lives once deployed, because she had finally embraced what made her different. "Maybe it's time I stopped hiding," she said quietly, "not for recognition, not for advancement, but because somewhere there's another pilot who thinks differently, who sees patterns others miss, who needs to know they're not alone." 3 months later, Technical Sergeant Harris stood before a classroom of advanced flight trainees. On the screen behind him was a neural mapping display showing distinctive thought patterns during complex flight calculations. "This," he explained, "is how intuitive flying looks at the neurological level. For decades, we've trained pilots to follow procedures, to calculate risks, to think methodically. But the most extraordinary pilots in history, the ones who accomplished the impossible, were thinking like this. A hand raised in the back row. "Sir, whose brain scan is that?" Harris smiled. "That would be Colonel Reeves, your new advanced flight theory instructor. I believe she's waiting to meet you now." The classroom door opened, and Sarah entered. She wore no special insignia, no indicators of her contributions to aviation history. Just the quiet confidence of someone who had finally stopped running from her own brilliance. "Good morning," she said simply. "My name is Sarah Reeves, and today we're going to talk about the difference between flying by calculation and flying by intuition." As she spoke, the students leaned forward, drawn not by her rank or reputation, but by the unmistakable presence of someone who had walked the boundary between possible and impossible, and returned to show others the way. The classroom fell silent as Sarah moved to the center of the room, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. The neural mapping display still glowed behind her, a visual representation of how her mind worked, patterns that defied conventional thinking yet solved problems that had stumped the greatest engineering minds for decades. "Flying isn't just about memorizing procedures," she continued, her voice calm but carrying to every corner. "It's about developing an intuitive relationship with the aircraft, with the atmosphere, with physics itself." A young lieutenant in the front row raised her hand. "Colonel, with respect, intuition can't be taught. You either have it or you don't." Sarah studied the woman, ambitious, precise, probably top of her class in technical knowledge. She reminded Sarah of herself at that age, before Kandahar, before everything changed. "That's what I believe too, Lieutenant." "Chen, ma'am." "Amelia Chen." "Lieutenant Chen, what if I told you intuition isn't mystical or magical? What if it's simply your brain processing information faster than your conscious mind can track?" Sarah gestured to the neural display. "These patterns occur when experienced pilots face complex scenarios. They're making calculations, but not in the way we traditionally think about mathematics. They're doing it through pattern recognition, through embodied knowledge, through thousands of hours of experience synthesized into split-second decisions." She walked along the front row, making eye contact with each student. "And yes, Lieutenant Chen, it can be taught, or, more accurately, it can be cultivated." The skepticism on Chen's face was unmistakable. "How do you cultivate something that happens unconsciously?" Sarah smiled. "By failing. Repeatedly. Under controlled conditions where those failures become data points for your neural network, also known as your brain, to process." She turned to the rest of the class, "Which is why, starting today, all of you will be spending time in the catastrophe simulator." A murmur rippled through the classroom. The catastrophe simulator was legendary, a brutally difficult flight simulation program where conditions deteriorated in unpredictable ways, forcing pilots to respond to cascading failures without time for conscious calculation. "Ma'am," another student ventured, "I heard no one's ever completed the Kandahar scenario in the simulator. Is that true?" Sarah's expression remained neutral, despite the unexpected reference. "The Kandahar extraction has become something of a benchmark, yes, but it's not about completing it perfectly. It's about how your brain adapts to impossible scenarios." After class, Technical Sergeant Harris, now Lieutenant Harris, following his commission into the officer corps, approached Sarah as she gathered her materials. "Bold move, throwing them into the catastrophe simulator on day one," he commented. Sarah shrugged. "They need to understand the gap between procedural flying and intuitive flying. Nothing illustrates that better than watching your simulated aircraft disintegrate because you followed the manual instead of your instincts." Harris smiled. "Lieutenant Chen reminds me of you. Brilliant, analytical, skeptical about anything that can't be quantified." "She'll either wash out or become exceptional," Sarah replied. "There's rarely middle ground with that personality type." "Speaking of exceptional," Harris lowered his voice. General Harrington called. "The first production model Aurora 7 with your neural interface is ready for mission deployment, effective with pilots who showed heightened intuitive capabilities." "When?" she asked simply. "Next week." Humanitarian mission to the earthquake zone in Central Asia. Medical evacuation of critical patients from areas inaccessible to conventional aircraft. Central Asia. The region where everything had gone wrong 20 years ago. Where her innovations had been weaponized against her will. Where she'd made the decision to disappear rather than contribute to systems she couldn't control. Now those same innovations, evolved through decades of development, were returning to the region, not as weapons, but as lifelines. "Tell Harrington I'll do it," she decided. "But I want Lieutenant Chen as my co-pilot." Harris raised his eyebrows. "She has zero hypersonic experience." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "It's time to see if she can trust something other than the manual." 2 days later, Sarah stood before Lieutenant Chen in a secure briefing room, explaining her decision. "You want me as co-pilot on an experimental aircraft using technology I've never trained on for a mission into an active disaster zone?" Chen's professionalism couldn't quite mask her disbelief. "Yes." Sarah slid a tablet across the table. "These are the mission parameters. 12 critical patients requiring immediate evacuation from Tashkent Regional Hospital to specialized facilities in Berlin. Current evacuation options involve multiple transfers and over 20 hours transit time. Aurora 7 can make the journey in under 2 hours." Chen scrolled through the briefing, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. "The neural interface. This is what you were demonstrating in class, but I don't have the neural patterns to operate it." "You won't be primary pilot," Sarah clarified, "but you'll be connected to the secondary interface. Think of it as an apprenticeship in intuitive flying." "Why me?" Chen asked directly. "There are dozens of pilots with more experience." Sarah studied the young lieutenant. In another life, another timeline, she might have been mentoring officers like Chen for years, passing on knowledge instead of hiding it. The thought carried both regret and possibility. "Because you think the way I used to," she answered honestly. "You trust systems, procedures, calculations. You excel at them. But to become truly exceptional, you need to trust something else. The knowledge your brain has accumulated that can't be accessed through conscious reasoning." Chen looked unconvinced. "That sounds dangerously close to fly by the seat of your pants, Colonel." Sarah smiled. "The seat of your pants is connected to your brain, Lieutenant, and your brain knows more than you give it credit for." After a moment of consideration, Chen straightened. "When do we leave?" The mission briefing the following day brought together military officials, medical coordinators, and the engineering team responsible for Aurora 7's final configurations. Sarah and Lieutenant Chen sat side by side, reviewing the latest meteorological data from the evacuation corridor. "Weather patterns over the mountains are unpredictable," a meteorologist explained, highlighting areas of concern. "We're seeing unusual vertical wind shear at the altitudes you'll be traversing. Nothing outside Aurora's capabilities, but worth noting." Sarah studied the patterns, her mind automatically calculating trajectories and adaptations. Beside her, Chen was taking meticulous notes, her expression focused. "Questions?" General Harrington asked from the head of the table. "Yes, sir," Chen spoke up. "The patients, what are their conditions? How will rapid acceleration to hypersonic speeds affect their medical status?" The medical coordinator nodded approvingly. "Good question, Lieutenant. We've selected patients whose conditions are critical but stable enough for high-speed transport. The medical compartment has been specially designed to minimize G-forces experienced during acceleration and deceleration phases." "And the neural interface?" Chen continued. "I've reviewed the technical specifications, but I'm still unclear on how my inexperience with the system might impact flight operations." "The primary interface will be calibrated to Colonel Reeves," the lead engineer explained. "Your secondary connection will be more observational than operational. You'll experience the intuitive responses without having control authority. Think of it as seeing through the primary pilot's cognitive process." Sarah noted Chen's slight frown, the expression of someone who preferred being in control rather than observing. It was a familiar sentiment. 20 years ago, Sarah would have asked the same questions, expressed the same reservations. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, The purpose of your presence isn't to control the aircraft. It's to understand how intuitive flying feels when you're connected to someone who's mastered it. After the briefing, they walked together toward the hangar where Aurora 7 waited, gleaming under the maintenance lights. The aircraft looked different from the test version Sarah had flown 3 months earlier, modified with a medical transport compartment and life support systems for the patients they would evacuate. "Permission to speak freely, Colonel?" Chen asked as they paused outside the hangar door. "Always. I researched you after our first class. Your service record is unusual. 20 years of solid but unremarkable performance. Then suddenly, 3 months ago, you're leading the Aurora program and revolutionizing neural flight interfaces." Chen's gaze was direct. "What changed?" Sarah considered deflecting the question, falling back on the classified nature of her history. Instead, she chose honesty, a luxury she hadn't allowed herself for decades. "What changed was that I stopped hiding," she said simply. 20 years ago, I helped develop technology that was used in ways I never intended. I had a choice: fight publicly against its misuse, or disappear and ensure it couldn't happen again. You chose to disappear," Chen concluded. "To become deliberately unremarkable." Sarah nodded. "Until General Harrington found me. Until I realized that hiding my capabilities wasn't protecting anyone, it was just limiting the good I could do." Chen absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. "Is that why you selected me for this mission? You see the same pattern? Do you hide your capabilities, Lieutenant?" "Not deliberately," Chen replied after a moment. "But I stick to what I can quantify, what I can predict. I don't trust." She gestured vaguely. "Whatever it is you call intuition." Sarah smiled. "Then yes, that's exactly why I chose you. Because tomorrow, at Mach 5, when conditions change faster than you can calculate responses, you're going to have to trust something else." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the hangar 2 hours before the scheduled departure. She found Aurora 7 surrounded by a final inspection team, each system being methodically verified before the historic mission. The medical compartment was being stocked with specialized equipment designed to monitor patients during hypersonic flight. To her surprise, Lieutenant Chen was already there, walking the exterior of the aircraft with the lead engineer, asking detailed questions about the airframe modifications. "Lieutenant," Sarah acknowledged, "you're early." "Couldn't sleep, ma'am." Chen handed over a tablet displaying her pre-flight research. "I've been reviewing the neural mapping data from your test flight. The patterns during turbulence navigation are fascinating. They don't match any conventional decision matrix I've studied." Sarah glanced at the data, recognizing the specific moment Chen had identified, the microburst she'd navigated using the neural interface. "What do you think is happening in this sequence?" Chen hesitated. "It looks almost like prediction, but not based on existing variables. More like," she struggled for the right words, "pattern recognition drawn from experience," Sarah completed. "My brain wasn't calculating wind shear coefficients. It was recognizing similarities to conditions I'd flown through before and anticipating how they would evolve." "That's not in any flight manual," Chen noted. "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not. And that's why today's flight is so important for you to experience." 2 hours later, they sat side by side in Aurora 7's cockpit, running through final pre-flight checks. The neural interface helmets were specially designed, lightweight, and integrated with the life support systems. As Sarah activated her primary connection, the familiar sensation washed over her, a heightened awareness of the aircraft systems merging with her own neural pathways. Beside her, Chen was experiencing the secondary interface for the first time. Her eyes widened slightly as the connection established. "It's intimate," she said quietly. "I can feel the aircraft, but also echoes of your perception. That will intensify during flight," Sarah explained, "especially during complex maneuvers. Don't fight it. Observe how different it feels from conventional flying." The radio crackled with clearance from flight control. Sarah guided Aurora 7 through vertical takeoff with practiced ease, the aircraft responding to her neural commands with perfect precision. As they accelerated through the sound barrier, she glanced at Chen, noting the lieutenant's intense focus on the instruments, displays. Sarah suggested, "Close your eyes, feel the aircraft's response through the interface." "That contradicts every protocol in existence," Chen replied, though her fingers loosened their grip on the controls. "We're not flying by protocol today, Lieutenant. We're flying by understanding." As they reached cruising altitude, Sarah engaged the hypersonic propulsion system. The acceleration pushed them back into their seats despite the inertial dampening systems. The sky darkened above them as Aurora 7 climbed to the edge of space, following the optimal trajectory to their destination. "Control, Aurora 7, Sarah reported. Maintaining Mach 5. 2 at 85,000 feet. Systems nominal. ETA to Tashkent 58 minutes. Copy, Aurora 7. Weather systems along your route are intensifying. Satellite shows developing storm fronts over the Carpathians." Sarah acknowledged the update, already feeling the distant atmospheric disturbances through the neural interface, pressure variations and wind patterns translating into tactile sensations through the connection. Beside her, Chen had finally closed her eyes, surrendering to the experience of the secondary interface. Her expression shifted from concentration to wonder as she felt what Sarah felt, the aircraft as an extension of consciousness, rather than a separate machine to be controlled. "This is," Chen began. "Different," Sarah completed. "This is how flying was always meant to feel." The first indication of trouble came 40 minutes into the flight as they approached the mountain ranges separating Central Europe from Asia. The neural interface transmitted atmospheric turbulence patterns before conventional sensors could detect them. Complex, chaotic disturbances unlike standard storm systems. "Something's wrong," Sarah murmured, her mind already adapting flight parameters through the interface. "These aren't natural weather formations." Chen's eyes snapped open, returning to the instrument displays. Readings show organized vertical shear patterns, almost like weaponized weather. Sarah finished grimly. "Someone's using high-altitude dispersion systems to create controlled turbulence corridors." The realization hit them simultaneously. 20 years ago, this region had been where Sarah's innovations were first weaponized. Now, someone was using next-generation atmospheric manipulation to create no-fly zones, likely targeting humanitarian missions exactly like theirs. "Control, Aurora 7, Sarah transmitted. "We're detecting artificial atmospheric disturbances along the primary corridor, requesting intelligence on potential hostiles in the region." There was a pause before Harrington's voice came through directly. "Aurora 7, we're analyzing satellite data now. Preliminary assessment suggests localized weather manipulation technology. Origin unknown, but consistent with systems developed by private military contractors operating in the region." Sarah's mind raced through implications. "They're trying to prevent the evacuation." "That's our assessment," Harrington confirmed. "Alternative routes would add significant time. Your call, Colonel. Proceed or abort." Sarah glanced at Chen, who was studying the turbulence patterns with intense focus. "Lieutenant? Analysis?" Chen looked up, surprised at being consulted. Conventional aircraft couldn't navigate this safely. Even with Aurora's capabilities, manual control would be insufficient given the unpredictable nature of the disturbances. And something shifted in Chen's expression, a willingness to step beyond pure analysis. But the neural interface might be able to anticipate the patterns. If these are artificially generated, they must follow some algorithmic logic, even if it's designed to appear random. Sarah nodded approvingly. "Control, we're proceeding through the disturbance zone. The neural interface should be capable of identifying underlying patterns in the artificial turbulence." "Understood, Aurora 7. Proceed with caution." As they descended into the disrupted airspace, the full complexity of the challenge became apparent. The turbulence wasn't simply chaotic. It was adaptive, shifting in response to their approach as if guided by some malevolent intelligence. "They're tracking us," Sarah realized, "adjusting the disturbance patterns based on our trajectory." Chen's hands hovered over the manual controls, instinct fighting against training. "How do we counter a system that adapts to our movements?" Sarah closed her eyes, deepening her connection to the neural interface. "We don't counter it. We dance with it." What followed defied conventional aviation. Principles. Rather than fighting against the turbulence or attempting to power through it, Sarah guided Aurora 7 into a complex series of maneuvers that worked with the artificial patterns. anticipating shifts, flowing into disturbances rather than avoiding them, using the energy of the disruptions to maintain their course while minimizing stress on the airframe. Through the secondary interface, Chen experienced the process directly, feeling how Sarah's neural patterns recognized emerging atmospheric behaviors before they fully formed, how her responses weren't calculated, but intuited from thousands of hours of flight experience synthesized into instantaneous action. "This is impossible," Chen whispered, watching as conventional flight indicators flashed warnings that contradicted the smooth sensations coming through the neural interface. "No," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the intensity of her focus. "It's just a different kind of possible, one that exists beyond the limits of procedural thinking." For 17 minutes, they navigated the atmospheric gauntlet, Aurora 7 dancing through impossible air currents that would have shattered conventional aircraft. The neural interface translated Sarah's intuitive understanding directly into flight controls, bypassing the delays of conscious calculation. When they finally emerged from the disruption zone into clear air, Chen released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She struggled to find appropriate words. "That," Sarah said quietly, "was flying by intuition." Tashkent appeared on the horizon, the earthquake damage visible even from altitude. Aurora 7 descended toward the designated landing zone near the regional hospital, where medical teams waited, with the critical patients selected for evacuation. As they touched down with precision, Sarah turned to Chen. "What did you learn, Lieutenant?" Chen was silent for a moment, processing the experience. That there are problems that can't be solved by following the manual. That sometimes the fastest path to a solution isn't through sequential reasoning, but through whatever it is you just did. "Intuition isn't magic," Sarah reminded her. "It's experience compressed into instant recognition. It's your brain knowing something before your conscious mind can explain why." The loading of patients proceeded with military efficiency. 12 critical cases secured in the specialized medical compartment, with 2 flight surgeons monitoring their conditions during transport. Within 20 minutes, they were airborne again, climbing toward the hypersonic corridor that would take them to Berlin. "Different route back?" Chen asked, noting Sarah's altered trajectory. "They'll be expecting us to retrace our path," Sarah explained. "Better to introduce uncertainty." The return flight encountered no artificial disturbances, suggesting their adversaries hadn't anticipated their success in penetrating the atmospheric defenses. As they approached Berlin, Sarah transferred primary control to Chen for the landing sequence. "Ma'am?" Chen questioned, surprised by the handoff. "Trust yourself, Lieutenant," Sarah said simply. "Your brain absorbed more than you realized during our journey." Chen hesitated only briefly before accepting primary neural interface control. Her movements were tentative at first, but gradually gained confidence as she felt Aurora 7 responding to her intentions through the interface. The landing wasn't as smooth as Sarah's would have been, but it demonstrated remarkable precision for someone with only hours of neural interface experience. As medical teams rushed to transfer the patients to waiting ambulances, General Harrington approached them on the tarmac. "Impressive work navigating those disturbances, Colonel," he said. "Our analysis confirms they were artificially generated using technology derived from classified weather modification research. We're still working to identify the responsible parties." Sarah nodded. "They're trying to prevent humanitarian access to the earthquake zone. This won't be the last attempt." "Which is why we need more pilots trained on your neural interface system," Harrington replied. "Starting with Lieutenant Chen, whose neural adaptation metrics are showing remarkable progress according to the flight data." Chen straightened under the unexpected praise. "Thank you, sir, but I was merely observing Colonel Reeves' techniques." "Not at the end," Sarah corrected. "That landing was all you, Lieutenant. Your first neural interface landing, and you executed it with precision that would take months to develop through conventional training." Later, as they debriefed in a secure conference room, Chen asked the question that had been forming throughout the mission. "Colonel, the atmospheric disruptions we Encountered? They're related to what happened 20 years ago, aren't they? To why you disappeared from the aerospace development program? Sarah set down her tablet, considering how much to reveal. Yes, the technology being used against us today evolved from systems I helped pioneer. Systems that were weaponized against my objections. When I couldn't stop it through official channels, I removed myself from the equation. But that didn't stop the development, Chen noted. No. It just proceeded without my input, without the ethical constraints I would have insisted upon. Sarah met Chen's gaze directly. Which is why I've stopped hiding. Because innovation happens regardless of our participation, but our voices only matter when we're in the room. 2 days later, Sarah stood before her advanced flight theory class again. The students, including Lieutenant Chen in the front row, watched with rapt attention as she displayed neural mapping data from their humanitarian mission. This, Sarah explained, pointing to a specific pattern, is what happens in the brain of a pilot who trusts their intuition during complex scenario navigation. Not random firing, not mystical inspiration, but highly organized neural pathways processing information too quickly for conscious awareness. She advanced to the next display. And this is Lieutenant Chen's neural activity during her first neural interface landing. Notice the similarities developing, the emergence of pattern recognition pathways that bypass step-by-step calculation. Chen sat a little straighter, her expression thoughtful rather than skeptical. The future of flight isn't about faster computers or more powerful engines, Sarah continued. It's about understanding how our minds actually work when we're at our best, and developing technologies that enhance those natural capabilities rather than forcing us to adapt to artificial constraints. After class, as students filed out, Chen remained behind. I've been thinking about what you said, about voices only mattering when we're in the room, she began. I've submitted my application for the Aurora program. If accepted, I'd like to focus on developing training protocols for intuitive flying techniques. Sarah smiled. They'd be fortunate to have you, Lieutenant. Few pilots can bridge the gap between analytical precision and intuitive understanding. You've demonstrated both. Because of what you showed me, Chen replied. 20 years is a long time to hide your light, Colonel. How many other pilots might have benefited from your mentorship during those years? The question carried no judgment, but it struck home nevertheless. How many indeed? We can't change the past, Sarah said quietly, but we can decide what to do with the present. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck overlooking the newly established Intuitive Flight Academy. Below, a dozen pilots, including Lieutenant Chen, now Captain Chen, were being fitted with next-generation neural interface helmets for their training flight. General Harrington joined her, his expression satisfied as he surveyed the facility. The program has exceeded all expectations. Neural interface technology is revolutionizing everything from disaster response to space exploration. And it all started because you stopped hiding. Sarah watched as Chen led her training group through pre-flight checks, her confidence evident in every movement. I made the wrong choice 20 years ago, she admitted. I thought disappearing would prevent misuse of my innovations. Instead, it just removed my voice from the conversation. And now? Harrington asked. Now I understand that true impact doesn't come from what you create. Sarah replied, watching the first training aircraft lift vertically from the pad. It comes from who you inspire along the way. In the lead aircraft, Captain Chen guided her team into formation, her neural interface translating intention into action with seamless precision. Through the dedicated training frequency, her voice came through clear and confident. Remember, we don't fly by calculation alone, we fly by understanding. Trust your intuition. It's just your experience speaking to you faster than words can follow. As the formation accelerated into the cloud layer above, Sarah felt a sense of completion she'd never experienced during her years of deliberate anonymity. Her innovations had found their proper purpose not in her own achievements, but in the capabilities she'd unlocked in others. The quiet woman who had once been mocked for her wounds had transformed not just herself, but an entire approach to human potential. Her legacy would continue not through plaques or medals, but through each pilot who learned to trust the wisdom their mind held beyond conscious thought. Each person who discovered that their greatest limitations were often self-imposed. And that, she realized, as she watched the aircraft disappear into the endless blue above, was a mission worth flying. 5 years passed in a momentum of transformation, each day building upon the foundation Sarah had established. The Intuitive Flight Academy had grown from a small experimental program into the premier training facility for advanced aviation, with graduates taking their neural interface expertise to every corner of aerospace innovation. What had begun as a reluctant emergence from shadows had become a revolution in human-machine integration. Sarah stood at the window of her office, watching as the newest class of cadets practiced formation flying with the third-generation Aurora aircraft. The original Aurora 7 now rested in the Academy's museum, a testament to the beginning of a journey no one had anticipated. "Colonel Reeves?" her assistant called from the doorway. "They're ready for you in the amphitheater." Sarah nodded, gathering the small leather portfolio that contained her notes for the ceremony. Today marked the graduation of the Academy's 5th class, and the official announcement of her retirement as director. The decision hadn't come easily. For 5 years, she had poured everything into building a program that transcended conventional aviation training, that honored the intuitive capabilities she had once hidden. But it was time for new leadership, for fresh perspectives to carry the vision forward. As she walked the corridor toward the amphitheater, memories surfaced of her own journey. The young lieutenant with extraordinary mathematical abilities who had revolutionized thrust vectoring systems, the captain who had disappeared into deliberate mediocrity after her innovations were weaponized, the colonel who had finally emerged to reclaim her voice and mentor a new generation. The amphitheater fell silent as she entered. 500 cadets in their dress uniforms, seated in precise rows, faculty members in their academic regalia, military dignitaries and aerospace industry leaders gathered to witness the graduation ceremony of a program that had redefined what was possible in human flight. At the podium stood Captain, now Colonel Chen, who had transformed from skeptical student to Sarah's most dedicated colleague and chosen successor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen announced, "please welcome Colonel Sarah Reeves, founding director of the Intuitive Flight Academy and recipient of this year's Aerospace Innovation Medal." The applause was thunderous, echoing through the vast space as Sarah made her way to the stage. She had never sought recognition, had actively avoided it for most of her career. Yet here it was, not for the innovations themselves, but for what she had built with those innovations, for the lives saved through Aurora medical evacuations, for the pilots trained to trust both their analytical minds and their intuitive capabilities. As the applause finally subsided, Sarah surveyed the gathering. Among the dignitaries sat General Harrington, now approaching retirement himself. Beside him was Lieutenant Harris, who had long since transitioned from medic to becoming the Academy's chief neurological researcher, pioneering new understanding of how intuitive flying affected brain development. 5 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "I stood before the first class of 20 cadets and made a promise. I told them that we would build a new kind of aviation training, one that honored both the precision of technical knowledge and the power of intuitive understanding." She gestured toward the graduating class. "Today, I see that promise fulfilled in each of you. You are not merely pilots who operate aircraft. You are aviators whose minds have formed symbiotic relationships with your machines, relationships that transcend conventional boundaries between human and technology." A holographic display illuminated above the stage, showing neural mapping data from the graduates' final training flights. The complex, beautiful patterns demonstrated what Sarah had discovered years earlier, that human intuition, when properly cultivated and technologically augmented, could solve problems that pure computation could not. "What you have mastered here is not just a skill," she continued. "It is a philosophy of integration. The neural interface technology is merely a tool. The true breakthrough is in how you've learned to trust the knowledge your mind holds beyond conscious calculation, the patterns your brain recognizes before your analytical thinking can name them." She paused, making eye contact with individual cadets. "This trust in your intuitive capabilities will serve you far beyond the cockpit. In crisis moments when seconds matter. In complex decisions when variables exceed what can be consciously processed. In leadership challenges when the human element defies algorithmic prediction." The room remained silent, captivated by the quiet authority of a woman who had revolutionized aviation not once but twice. First, through her mathematical innovations, then through her educational vision. As I prepare to step down as director, Sarah continued, I want to share something personal with you. Something I've never spoken of publicly. A subtle shift rippled through the audience. For 5 years, Sarah had led the academy with professional precision, rarely revealing details about her past beyond what was necessary for educational context. 25 years ago, I made a choice to disappear, she said, her voice softening. My innovations in thrust-vectoring mathematics had been weaponized against my intentions, used in ways that contradicted my values. Rather than fight a system I believed I couldn't change, I chose to remove myself from it, to hide my capabilities, to become deliberately unremarkable. She let the words settle across the amphitheater. It was the wrong choice. The admission hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity, profound in its implications. By disappearing, I surrendered my voice in how my innovations would be used. I abandoned my responsibility to guide their ethical application. For 20 years, I believed I was taking a principled stand through my absence, when in reality I was merely abdicating my power to shape the future. Sarah set aside her prepared notes, speaking now from a place of hard-earned wisdom. Each of you graduates today with extraordinary capabilities, neural interface expertise that places you among the most advanced pilots in history. But your true power lies not in what you can do with an aircraft. It lies in how you choose to use your voice, your influence, your presence in rooms where decisions are made. She gestured toward Colonel Chen. 5 years ago then, Lieutenant Chen challenged me with a question I couldn't answer. How many pilots might have benefited from mentorship I didn't provide during those 20 years of hiding? How many innovations might have been guided toward humanitarian applications rather than weaponization if I had stayed engaged rather than disappeared? Chen nodded solemnly, acknowledging the weight of that shared history. I tell you this not to diminish the celebration of your achievement, Sarah continued, but to ensure you understand its full responsibility. The technical capabilities you've developed here are remarkable, but your moral courage, your willingness to remain engaged even when systems resist your influence, will determine your true legacy. A cadet in the front row raised her hand, an unusual break in ceremony protocol. Sarah paused, then nodded, permitting the question. Colonel, the young woman asked, given what you've learned, what would you do differently if you could go back 25 years? The question hung in the air, direct and profound. The amphitheater remained absolutely silent as Sarah considered her response. I would stay, she finally said. I would fight for ethical applications of my work from within the system, building alliances rather than isolation. I would recognize that impact requires presence, that change demands persistence, that transformation happens through engagement, not withdrawal. She smiled slightly. But most importantly, I would understand sooner that my highest contribution wasn't the mathematical breakthrough itself, but the potential to mentor others who would carry it forward with integrity. Sarah gestured toward the graduating class. Which is why this academy exists, not merely to train exceptional pilots, but to cultivate leaders who understand that technological innovation without ethical guidance is inherently dangerous, and that those best positioned to provide that guidance are often those who understand the technology most deeply. As the ceremony concluded and the graduates received their neural interface wings, a new insignia created specifically for Academy alumni. Sarah stepped back, allowing Colonel Chen to take center stage as the incoming director. The symbolic transition marked more than an administrative change. It represented the fulfillment of Sarah's redemptive vision, building something that would continue beyond her direct involvement, guided by values she had instilled. Later, at the reception in the Academy's Grand Hall, Sarah found herself approached by an elderly man she didn't immediately recognize. His uniform bore the insignia of a retired Major General, though not from any branch she was familiar with. Colonel Reeves, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. Forgive the intrusion. I attended your ceremony as a guest of General Harrington. "It's no intrusion," she replied politely. "Are you affiliated with the aerospace program?" The man smiled faintly. "In a manner of speaking. 25 years ago, I was stationed at the Forward Operating Base in Kyrgyzstan, when your thrust vectoring system was first deployed in combat operations." Sarah's expression cooled, her posture stiffening almost imperceptibly. "I see. I don't think you do," the man continued gently. "I was the base commander who received your formal protest, your objection to how your innovation was being applied. I was the one who forwarded your concerns up the chain of command, where they were ultimately dismissed." Sarah had not spoken of those events in detail to anyone, not even to Colonel Chen or General Harrington. The specific circumstances of her disillusionment had remained classified, buried in redacted files. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked quietly. The retired general's eyes held a depth of understanding that caught her by surprise. "Because I've followed your journey from afar, your disappearance, your emergency extraction flight in Kandahar that revealed your continued presence in the service, your reemergence with Aurora 7, this academy you've built." He gestured toward the graduates celebrating around them. "And I wanted you to know something I believe you deserve to hear. Your protest was not in vain. It may have been officially dismissed, but it planted seeds that took years to germinate." Sarah studied him, uncertain whether to trust these unexpected revelations. 3 years after you removed yourself from the aerospace program," he continued, "a committee was formed to review ethical applications of advanced aviation technologies. It was created in direct response to concerns raised by your protest." The stars appearing in the twilight sky. General Harrington found her there, approaching with the respectful quiet of someone who understood the value of contemplative silence. "Remarkable ceremony," he said as he took a seat on the bench beside her. "You've built something extraordinary here, Sarah." "We've built it," she corrected gently. "I wouldn't have had the opportunity without your persistence in finding me when Aurora 7 was in trouble." Harrington chuckled. "One of my better decisions. Though I admit, when you demanded to test fly the prototype yourself, I nearly had a cardiac event." The shared memory brought a smile to Sarah's face. The neural interface needed to be calibrated to intuitive responses. There was no other way to validate the concept. "And now it's standard technology for advanced aviation," Harrington noted, "with applications expanding into space exploration, disaster response, medical transport, and military operations," Sarah added, her tone neutral but pointed. Harrington nodded, acknowledging the complexity. "Under ethical deployment protocols you helped establish, systems that minimize collateral impact. Technologies designed for precision rather than destruction." "It's never that simple," Sarah replied. "Technology developed with the best intentions can be repurposed, modified, applied in ways its creators never intended. Which is precisely why we need people like you engaged in the process." Harrington countered, "Not hiding your capabilities out of fear of misuse, but actively guiding applications toward humanitarian purposes." Sarah was silent for a moment, watching the last light fade from the western sky. "I met someone interesting at the reception. A retired major general who claims my original protest against weaponizing my innovations actually led to the humanitarian deployment protocols we use today." "Ahmadi?" Harrington nodded. "Yes, he mentioned wanting to speak with you. His perspective is accurate, though incomplete. Your protest planted seeds, certainly, but it was your return, your willingness to re-engage and demonstrate humanitarian applications through Aurora 7 that truly transformed the program." He turned to face her directly. "Your mistake wasn't protesting the weaponization. Your mistake was believing that removing yourself from the equation would prevent misuse of your innovations. Only by remaining engaged, by demonstrating better applications, could you shape how your work would be used. A lesson I hope the graduates understand more quickly than I did," Sarah said quietly. "I believe they will," Harrington replied. "You've built that understanding into the Academy's DNA. Every cadet learns not just how to fly with neural interfaces, but why the ethical application of that technology matters, and that their voices in guiding its use are as important as their technical skills in deploying it." The night had fully descended now, stars brilliant against the dark sky. In the distance, the lights of the Academy complex glowed steadily, a beacon of innovation guided by conscience. "So," Harrington asked after a comfortable silence, "what comes next for you? Retirement seems unlikely given your energy and commitment." Sarah smiled. "Not retirement. Evolution. I've accepted a position with the International Aerospace Ethics Commission, developing frameworks for neural interface applications beyond aviation, medical diagnosis, disaster prediction, educational acceleration. Expanding your influence rather than limiting it," Harrington noted approvingly. "Expanding responsibility," Sarah corrected. "Using what I've learned about intuitive capabilities to ensure the next generation of neural technology serves humanity's needs rather than merely its desires." She gazed up at the stars, distant points of light that had once seemed as unreachable as the redemption she had found in returning to her true capabilities. 25 years ago, I believed my only options were compliance or disappearance," she reflected. "I didn't understand that transformation requires engagement, that systems change when people of conscience remain within them, demonstrating better possibilities through their actions rather than their absence." Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "A lesson many never learn. A lesson I hope to help others avoid having to learn through painful experience," Sarah replied. "Which is why the Academy must continue evolving under Colonel Chen's leadership, training not just exceptional pilots, but ethical innovators who understand that their greatest responsibility is not what they can do with technology, but how they guide its application." As they walked back toward the Academy complex, the graduating class had gathered for an evening tradition, a formation flight using neural interfaces to create synchronized light patterns across the night sky. The aircraft moved in perfect harmony, pilots connected through technology that bridged the gap between individual intention and collective action. Sarah watched as the formation executed a complex, beautiful maneuver that would have been impossible through conventional controls, a physical manifestation of the philosophy she had built over 5 years of leadership. Not merely pushing technical boundaries, but demonstrating how human intuition, properly cultivated and technologically augmented, could achieve what neither human nor machine could accomplish alone. "They fly as one mind," Harrington observed. "No," Sarah corrected gently. "They fly as many minds in perfect coordination, each contributing their unique perspective to a shared vision. The neural interface doesn't erase individual identity. It amplifies collective potential while preserving individual responsibility." As the formation completed its intricate dance and began landing procedures, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The wounded, quiet woman who had once been mocked for hiding her capabilities had transformed not just herself but an entire approach to human-machine integration. Her legacy would continue not through personal accolades, but through each pilot, each engineer, each leader, who understood that true innovation balances technological advancement with ethical responsibility. The next morning, as Sarah prepared to depart for her new position, she found Colonel Chen waiting beside her transport, a small package in hand. "A parting gift," Chen explained, offering the carefully wrapped object. From the graduating class, Sarah unwrapped it to find a neural interface component, not standard issue, but custom designed. Engraved on its surface was a simple phrase: "Our minds grow stronger when we trust what they know beyond what we can explain." "Your words from the first day of training," Chen said quietly. "Words that transformed how we understand not just flying, but learning itself." Sarah traced the engraving with her finger, emotions rising unexpectedly. "Take care of them, Amelia. Help them understand that their greatest impact may come not from the technologies they master, but from how they guide those technologies towards serving humanity." "I will," Chen promised. "And when they ask about the wounded, quiet woman who revolutionized aviation twice, once through mathematical brilliance and once through ethical vision, what should I tell them?" Sarah considered the question, thinking of her journey from prodigy to deliberately unremarkable captain to influential leader, of the 20 years spent hiding her capabilities, and the 5 years spent demonstrating how those same capabilities could transform lives when properly directed. "Tell them that our greatest strength often emerges from our deepest wounds," she said finally. "That silence can be both a refuge and a prison, and that true courage isn't found in either extraordinary achievement or deliberate obscurity, but in the willingness to use your unique capabilities in service to something greater than yourself, even when that service demands you step into the light you once feared." As her transport lifted vertically from the Academy grounds, Sarah looked down at the complex she had built. The classrooms where theory was taught, the simulators where neural interfaces were mastered, the hangars where advanced aircraft awaited the next generation of intuitive pilots. Most importantly, she saw the cadets gathering for morning formation, their faces turned upward to watch her departure. Not the end of a journey, she realized, but a continuation. Not a conclusion, but a transformation. The wounded, quiet woman had found her voice, not by hiding her light, nor by seeking recognition, but by illuminating paths for others to follow, by demonstrating that our deepest capabilities find their highest expression not in personal achievement, but in how we elevate those who come after us. The transport banked toward the eastern horizon, where the rising sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of possibility. Behind her, the academy continued its essential work. Before her lay new challenges, new opportunities to ensure that the technologies she had helped pioneer would serve humanity's highest aspirations rather than its baser instincts. Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of 20 years of hiding finally lift completely from her shoulders. The wounded, quiet woman had found her healing not in retreat, but in return, not in obscurity, but in impact, not in safety, but in service. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.